I don't know where to begin, so I'll start with the truth. My life used to look perfect from the outside. I was 34, married for nearly 8 years, and working as a mid-level manager in a logistics company. My wife, Claire, was the kind of woman people instantly liked. Warm, clever, beautiful in a way that never needed makeup. Together we had built a life that seemed enviable to our friends. A modest but comfortable apartment, a circle of close companions, vacations once or twice a year, dinners on Fridays at our favorite Italian place. I used to think that was enough. Stability, security, companionship. Wasn't that the whole point of love? But somewhere along the way, something inside me shifted. Or maybe it didn't shift all at once. Maybe it eroded slowly, like water wearing down stone. Our marriage was not unhappy. That's important for me to admit. Claire never betrayed me, never hurt me, never stopped caring. But she had grown comfortable, and so had I. We spoke more about bills than dreams, more about groceries than passions. Our intimacy, once electric, had dulled into something routine, predictable, sometimes even perfunctory. She would kiss me goodnight and roll to her side, already halfway to sleep. I, on the other hand, found myself restless. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, asking questions I didn't want to answer. Is this it? Is this the rest of my life? Am I supposed to feel content with lukewarm affection and polite conversations about laundry? That's when she appeared in my life. Her name was Isabel. She joined our company as a new project coordinator. I remember the first meeting I had with her vividly. It wasn't that she was breathtakingly beautiful, though she had an undeniable presence. It was the way she carried herself. Confident, quick with her words, eyes that seemed to hold a private joke she wasn't ready to share. She listened differently than others, like every word mattered, like she wasn't just waiting for her turn to speak. I noticed her, of course, but at first I dismissed it. People come and go, attractive coworkers appear and fade into the background. But Isabel had a way of returning to my thoughts even when I tried not to think of her. I'd catch myself looking forward to her reports and meetings, the way she'd glance up at me with that half-smile, as though we shared a secret. Claire noticed something else too, though not about Isabel. She noticed me becoming more distant, more distracted at home. She asked if work was stressful, and I told her yes. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. Work was demanding, but it wasn't the reason I was staring at my phone late at night, rereading messages that had nothing to do with deadlines. At first, Isabel and I kept it professional. Emails, project updates, quick exchanges in the hallway. But little by little, the edges blurred. A joke slipped into an email, a coffee together during lunch breaks, a conversation that lingered just a few minutes longer than necessary. One evening, as we stayed late to finish a report, she asked me about my marriage. Not in a prying way, more like she was curious about who I was beyond the job. "You talk about your wife sometimes," she said, leaning against the edge of my desk. "It sounds like you've been together forever." "Almost 8 years," I replied, tapping at the keyboard though my focus had already drifted. "Feels like forever, in some ways. And in others?" she asked softly. I looked up at her then, and there was something in her eyes that made me hesitate. Something daring, something knowing. I could have shut it down right there. I could have said, "Yes, I'm happy. I love her. Let's not talk about this." But I didn't. Instead, I said, "In others, it feels like I'm not sure who I am anymore." That was the first time I admitted aloud what had been gnawing at me in silence. Isabel didn't judge. She didn't even respond with advice. She just listened, tilting her head slightly, eyes fixed on mine, and I felt seen in a way I hadn't in years. That night, as I drove home, Claire greeted me with a smile, kissed my cheek, asked how work was. I smiled back, answered busy, and sat down at the table. But while she told me about her day, my mind replayed Isabel's expression, the way she had looked at me like she understood something Claire no longer did. I should have been scared. I should have recognized the danger right there, should have run from it before it had a chance to grow. But instead, I felt a thrill I hadn't felt in years, a sense of possibility, of being alive again. And that was how it began. I often tell myself that everything could have stopped there, that if I had simply pulled back, kept a polite distance, Isabel would have remained just a coworker whose presence I noticed but never indulged. But that's not what happened. The truth is, I wanted to be near her. I wanted the way she made me feel, curious, alive, unsteady. It was intoxicating, the kind of feeling you don't realize you've been starving for until it's suddenly put in front of you. Started small, almost innocent. A shared joke in a meeting, something that made only the two of us laugh while the others remained oblivious. A lunch where we happened to sit at the same table in the cafeteria. Then a habit formed, coffee breaks together. At first it was once a week, then twice, then almost every day. She asked me questions no one else asked anymore. What did you want to be when you were younger? Do you ever think you settled too quickly? If money didn't matter, what would you be doing right now? I didn't have answers to most of them, but she didn't mind. She liked the way I paused, thought, admitted I wasn't sure. Claire and I had stopped having conversations like that years ago. Our words revolved around practicalities. Bills, groceries, relatives, schedules. Isabel's questions, by contrast, lit up parts of me I'd buried long ago. One afternoon, we were walking back from a coffee run, and she brushed my arm with hers. A simple, fleeting touch. Could have been accidental. But the way she looked at me afterward, the small smile playing at the corner of her lips, it was no accident. My chest tightened, my palms dampened, and yet I didn't pull away. I let it linger in my mind all day. That night, when Claire kissed me goodnight, I lay in bed thinking of that touch, of Isabel's skin brushing mine. Soon after, we started texting. At first about work, then about little things, movies, music, articles we found online. The messages stretched later into the evenings, sometimes past midnight. I remember lying in bed next to Claire, phone glowing in my hand under the blanket, while Isabel typed words that made me feel like a teenager again. One night she wrote, "Do you ever feel like you're living two lives?" I stared at the message for minutes, my wife breathing softly beside me, the quiet hum of the city outside, and this question from Isabel that felt like she'd read my mind. Every day I typed back. From then on, the line between professional and personal blurred completely. We began sharing things we shouldn't have, complaints about our partners, little admissions about our restlessness. Isabel had been in a long-term relationship too, though not married. From the way she spoke of him, I could tell she felt trapped, as though he had become a part of her life more by habit than by love. There was a night we stayed late again, just the two of us finishing a deadline. When we wrapped up, instead of heading to our cars, we lingered in the office. She perched on the edge of my desk, sipping from a can of soda, watching me with that playful glint in her eyes. "You know," she said, "you're different when we're alone." "How so?" I asked, pretending to focus on closing my laptop. "You smile more. You let yourself breathe." I laughed nervously, shaking my head. "Maybe you just bring out the worst in me. Or the best," she countered, her voice low, deliberate. The silence that followed was charged, heavy, like standing too close to a storm. I could feel my heart pounding, the air between us vibrating with something unspoken. For a moment, I thought she was going to lean in. My body ached with the desire for it. But she didn't. She just slid off the desk, grabbed her coat, and said, "Good night." When the door closed behind her, I sat in the dim office, my hands trembling, knowing I was already too far gone. The next morning, I woke up next to Claire, her face peaceful in sleep, and guilt crashed over me like a wave. But guilt didn't stop me. It only made me more careful, more secretive. By the time I got to the office, Isabel was there with her smile, her questions, her subtle touches, and all my guilt dissolved into hunger. That was when I realized this wasn't just a passing attraction. It was a spark threatening to ignite into something uncontrollable. And I wanted it to. There's a moment in every forbidden story where the point of no return reveals itself. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's explosive. For me, it happened on a rainy Thursday evening. The office had emptied out early because of the storm. Most people didn't want to get caught in the downpour, but Isabel and I had stayed behind to finish a client presentation. By the time we wrapped up, the rain outside was hammering against the windows, relentless, with no sign of letting up. "Looks like we're trapped," Isabel said, glancing toward the sheets of water outside. I chuckled, trying to sound casual, though my pulse was already racing. "Guess we'll have to wait it out." We ended up in the break room, sitting close on the worn leather sofa, the sound of the storm cocooning us in isolation. She took off her heels and tucked her legs beneath her, sipping the lukewarm coffee we'd reheated in the microwave. "You ever think about just leaving it all?" she asked suddenly, eyes fixed on the window, rain streaking down the glass. "Leaving what?" "Everything. The routines, the expectations, the lives we're supposed to live. Just walking away." I laughed softly. "That sounds like running away." "Maybe running away isn't always bad," she said. Then she looked at me, and the weight of her gaze felt like gravity pulling me toward her. The air between us grew thick. I could hear the rain, my own heartbeat, the faint hum of the vending machine. Every part of me screamed to move closer, to touch her, to feel the thing we'd been circling for weeks. And then she leaned in. It wasn't sudden, wasn't reckless. It was slow, deliberate, like she was giving me every chance to stop it. But I didn't stop it. I met her halfway, and when our lips touched, the world outside vanished. Her kiss was different from Claire's, hungrier, more searching, as if she'd been waiting for this as long as I had. My hands trembled as I cupped her face, tasting coffee and rain on her lips. She let out a soft sound, half sigh, half moan, and the sound alone sent fire through my veins. When we pulled back, breathless, reality slammed into me. "We shouldn't," I began. "I know," she whispered, but she didn't move away. Her forehead rested against mine, her hand still on my chest. "But I don't want to stop." Neither did I. That night, I drove home soaked in guilt. Claire was already asleep, the bedroom dark and quiet. I stood at the door, watching her breathe, feeling like a stranger in my own life. I showered, scrubbing my skin as though I could wash away what had happened. But no amount of hot water could erase Isabel's lips from mine. The next day at work, we pretended nothing had changed. We exchanged polite words in front of others, acted professional. But every glance, every accidental brush of hands, carried the memory of that kiss. It didn't take long before we crossed the line completely. A week later, after another late night, she asked if I could give her a ride home. The storm had passed, the streets glistening with rain. She lived in a small apartment on the other side of town. When we pulled up, she hesitated before getting out. "Do you want to come in?" she asked. Her voice was casual, but her eyes weren't. I should have said no. God, I knew I should have, but I followed her inside like a moth to flame. The moment the door closed, restraint shattered. She pulled me in, our lips crashing together, her body pressed against mine. We stumbled through the hallway, shedding jackets, shoes, logic. Her apartment was small, dimly lit, but it felt like the center of the universe in that moment. When we finally made it to her bed, it wasn't just physical. It was desperate, almost violent in its urgency, like we were both starving. Every touch, every gasp, every whispered, "Don't stop," drowned out the voice in my head screaming about vows, loyalty, betrayal. Afterward, lying tangled in the sheets, sweat cooling on our skin, silence settled over us. She traced circles on my chest with her finger, her head resting against my shoulder. "This changes everything, doesn't it?" she murmured. "Yes," I admitted. "It does." But instead of regret, what I felt was relief. Relief that the tension was finally broken, that the hunger had finally been fed. I knew it was dangerous, knew it could destroy everything I'd built with Claire, but in that moment, I didn't care. I had crossed the line, and I had no intention of going back. Affairs never stay simple. At first, they feel like a secret oasis. Stolen hours, hidden glances, the intoxicating rush of living in two worlds at once. But eventually, the walls between those worlds start to crack. For a while, Isabel and I lived inside a bubble. Late nights at her apartment, lunches that stretched longer than they should, text messages that lit up my phone at odd hours. I became a master of excuses, traffic, extra meetings, sudden deadlines. Claire accepted them without suspicion, at least at first. She trusted me, and I took advantage of that trust in ways that make me sick to admit now. But lies have weight. They stack up, one on top of another, until they press down on you with unbearable force. There were nights when I came home smelling faintly of Isabel's perfume, a subtle floral note I prayed Claire wouldn't notice. Sometimes, when I lay in bed beside my wife, I'd close my eyes and feel Isabel's hair against my skin, her lips still lingering on mine. The guilt was constant, but so was the hunger. Isabel, for her part, began to want more. At first, she was content with secrecy, with being the stolen chapter in my story. But over time, her patience wore thin. One night, as we lay tangled in her sheets, she turned to me with a seriousness I hadn't seen before. "Do you ever think about leaving her?" she asked. The question hit me like a knife. "Isabel, I'm not saying you have to," she interrupted quickly. I can't be this forever. The woman you sneak around to see. I want more." I looked at her then, at the vulnerability in her eyes, the way her fingers tightened around mine. Part of me wanted to promise her everything. But another part, the part tethered to Claire, to the life I had built, remained silent. Instead, I whispered, "I need time." She nodded, but the shadow of disappointment lingered. That was the beginning of the tension. At home, Claire started to notice the distance. She'd ask why I was distracted at dinner, why I seemed so tired all the time. I'd snap back with excuses, sometimes even irritation, just to deflect her questions. I hated myself for it. She didn't deserve my coldness. But I was living in two realities, and each one was pulling me apart. The pressure grew worse when jealousy entered the picture. One evening, Isabel told me she had gone out with friends, and a male coworker had been there. She mentioned it casually, but the idea of another man making her laugh, touching her hand, made my stomach twist. I realized then how hypocritical I was. I had no right to be jealous when I was betraying my own wife. And yet, I couldn't stop the surge of possessiveness. "Do you like him?" I asked sharply. She raised an eyebrow. "Are you serious? You're married, and you're asking me that?" Her words stung, but she wasn't wrong. From that night on, the affair was no longer just passion and thrill. It was arguments, insecurities, late-night silences that carried unspoken questions. I'd lie awake in Isabel's bed, listening to her breathe, and wonder how long we could keep this charade before it all came crashing down. And it was coming down. I could feel it. The close calls became too many. Claire once found a text from Isabel on my phone. Innocent enough, but sent too late at night to be explained away easily. Another time, I came home with a lipstick smudge on my shirt collar and had to spin a clumsy story about someone at work brushing past me. Claire's eyes lingered on me longer after that. I could see the doubt forming. But the truth? Deep down, I almost wanted to be caught. Living in secrecy was exhausting, and some selfish part of me thought that if it all exploded, I wouldn't have to make the choice myself. One night, after yet another argument with Isabel, this one about my hesitation to commit to her fully, I drove home in a haze of frustration. Claire was waiting at the table, dinner cold, her arms folded. "We need to talk," she said. My chest tightened. For a moment I thought it was over, that she knew everything, that the facade had collapsed. But what she said was both a relief and a dagger. "You're not here anymore. Even when you're home, you're somewhere else. If something's wrong, tell me. If I did something, tell me. Just don't shut me out." Her voice broke on the last words, and guilt ripped through me like a blade. She still loved me. She still believed we could fix whatever was wrong. And I sat there, nodding, lying through my teeth about stress at work, about being tired, about anything but the truth. That night, as she fell asleep beside me, I stared at the ceiling, realizing I was on the edge of losing everything. The unraveling had begun, and it was only a matter of time before the threads snapped completely. It's strange how fast lies can collapse. You spend months building walls, weaving excuses, convincing yourself you're in control. And then, in a single moment, everything falls apart. For me, it happened on a Saturday. Claire and I were supposed to have dinner with her sister and brother-in-law. I had told Isabel I couldn't see her that night, but she sent me a text just before I left the apartment. "I miss you. I wish it were you I was going to dinner with." The message wasn't unusual. What was unusual was my carelessness. I left my phone on the kitchen counter while I changed my shirt. Claire walked in, saw the screen light up, and read it. When I came back into the room, she was holding my phone. Her face was pale, her hands trembling, but her voice was deadly calm. "Who is Isabel?" The air left my lungs. My mind scrambled for a lie, but the truth was already written all over her face. She knew. "Claire," I began, but the words caught in my throat. Her eyes filled with tears as she shoved the phone at me. "How long?" I tried to speak, but nothing came out. Silence can be louder than any confession. "That long?" she whispered, answering her own question. She backed away, covering her mouth with her hand as if she might be sick. "My God, you've been lying to me. Every late night, every excuse." Her voice cracked. "You've been with her." I stepped toward her, desperate, ashamed. "It wasn't supposed to. Claire, I never meant to." "Don't you dare," she snapped, her eyes blazing. "Don't you dare tell me it wasn't supposed to happen. You made a choice. Again and again, you chose her over me." Her words hit harder than any slap. I tried to reach for her, but she pulled away like my touch burned. "Was it worth it?" she demanded. "Was she worth throwing us away?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that Isabel meant nothing compared to her. But the truth sat like a stone in my chest. Isabel did mean something. Maybe not everything, maybe not forever, but something powerful enough to make me risk destroying my marriage. My silence was all the answer she needed. She broke then, tears streaming down her face, her body shaking. I'd never seen Claire cry like that. Not once in our 8 years together. It was the sound of a heart shattering. "Get out," she whispered. "Claire, get out." Her voice rose to a scream, raw and jagged. "I can't even look at you." I left, not because I wanted to, but because there was nothing else I could do. The door slammed behind me, final and deafening. I drove aimlessly for hours, guilt eating me alive. Eventually, I ended up at Isabel's apartment. When she opened the door and saw my face, she didn't ask questions. She just pulled me inside, held me while I broke down. "She knows," I whispered into her shoulder. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, softly, "Maybe it's better this way." I pulled back, staring at her. "Better? At least now we don't have to hide anymore," she said. There was hope in her eyes, hope that now I would finally choose her. But all I felt was emptiness, because choosing her didn't erase what I'd lost. It didn't erase Claire's tears, the devastation in her voice, the home I'd been exiled from. I had betrayed the woman who had trusted me most, and no matter what happened next, that stain would never wash away. The confrontation had come, and the damage was irreversible. The days that followed felt like moving through a fog. I stayed at Isabel's apartment, but it never felt like home. Her place was filled with the scent of her perfume, her laughter, her warmth. Yet I couldn't shake the image of Claire's face, streaked with tears, her voice breaking as she told me to leave. Isabel tried to comfort me. She cooked for us. She touched me with tenderness. She whispered promises that we could finally build something real together. But underneath it all, I saw the unspoken truth. We hadn't stepped into freedom. We had stepped into ruin. Claire didn't answer my calls. I tried for days to reach her. Texts, voicemails, even showing up at the apartment. The locks had been changed. Her sister called me once, her voice full of cold fury. "Leave her alone. She doesn't want to see you." That was the end of it. Claire disappeared from my daily life as swiftly as she had once filled it. Our friends divided quietly, some cutting me off without explanation, others staying but with a look in their eyes that said they no longer trusted me. At work, whispers began to circulate. Isabel and I weren't as discreet as we thought. The thrill of our secret became the weight of our scandal. And with time, even Isabel began to change. Without the secrecy, without the stolen hours, without the thrill of doing something forbidden, what was left between us? We argued more. She wanted me to commit fully, to move in, to talk about a future. I hesitated, not because I didn't care for her, but because everything around us was built on betrayal. One night, months later, she asked me the question I'd been avoiding. Do you regret choosing me? I stared at her across the small kitchen table, wine glasses half empty between us. Her eyes were searching mine, desperate for reassurance, and I couldn't give it. I regret losing her, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. The silence that followed was unbearable. Isabel looked down, nodded slowly, then stood and walked away. She didn't say it, but we both knew the end had come. A week later, she moved out of the city, taking a new job somewhere far enough that I wouldn't hear her name in passing anymore. And so I was left alone. Alone with the wreckage I had created. Alone with the echo of two women's voices in my head. One filled with hope, the other filled with heartbreak. People like to imagine affairs are passionate escapes, that they're filled with romance and excitement. And they are, for a time. But no one tells you about the aftermath. The silence, the loneliness, the gnawing guilt that crawls into your bones and never fully leaves. Claire eventually filed for divorce. I signed the papers without protest. I couldn't stand in front of her again, couldn't look into the eyes of the woman I had betrayed so deeply. It would have been selfish to ask for forgiveness. Years have passed since then. I live alone now in a smaller apartment with less light. I go to work, I come home, I make simple meals for one. On the surface, my life looks orderly again. But inside, there's a constant ache. Sometimes, late at night, I catch myself scrolling through old photos. Claire's smile on a summer vacation, Isabel's laughter caught in a candid snapshot. Two women who loved me in different ways, and both of whom I hurt beyond repair. If this sounds like a confession, that's because it is. I don't tell this story to justify myself or to ask for sympathy. I tell it because silence eats at you more than the truth ever could. I betrayed my wife. I betrayed myself. I chased passion and ended up with ashes. And if there's one lesson I carry, it's this. Desire can burn so brightly it blinds you. But when the fire dies, you're left alone in the dark, staring at what you destroyed. That's my story. That's the truth I live with.